Sponsored by Squarespace. Take a look at this map. It shows the faction's place in Azeroth back in 2004, so vanilla. 22 years ago, and funnily enough, nearly as much time has passed in-game. And yes, the actual map itself is the most up-to-date map, and that means it's got the scars of the Cataclysm World revamp. But for today's video, we want the map to be as big as possible because there's something that we want to show you. Take a look at the factions. Stormwind, the Dwarves, small blotches of blue. We have the Orcs taking their first steps into the Barrens. Notice how insignificant they are. Okay, let's now fill the map in with everything else that's going on. The Zandalari, Legion, Darkiron, Blackrock, Centaurs, and, of course, the Scourge. Then, huge stretches of unexplored land. Mist-shrouded Pandaria, the Lost Dragon Isles, and the recently discovered Khaz-Algar. We were pockets of safety in a vast, dangerous world. Now, let's zoom that forward. This is the world map during Battle for Azeroth, and the difference is immediate. The world is split between red and blue. Everything else is either undiscovered or destroyed. It's a world dominated by the Alliance and Horde, two of the greatest storytelling forces in the setting. And since then, well, nothing. Worse than nothing. Total stagnation. Stormwind's king walked away from his throne, the Undercity is destroyed, a Horde council has lost itself to committee politics, and the Night Elves, exhausted by constantly sacrificing themselves in the name of the Alliance, are now forging their own destiny. It's been 8 years since this map was relevant to Azeroth's future. 8 years of drip-fed factional lore, small stories, and minor inclusions that give us a sense that the Alliance and Horde are barely clinging to relevance. After 8 years, it's easy to conclude Blizzard have forgotten the factions, or don't think of them as an important way to tell stories in the modern setting. So, we thought we'd remind them. Let's go on a journey together. From the factions living on the edge of a dangerous world to a world of politics now living at the edge of Warcraft's lore. Here's the thing I've noticed. A lot of people who need a website don't have one, or they have one that doesn't look great. And it's often not because people can't afford it. It's because they just get overwhelmed halfway through building it and quit. But today's sponsor, Squarespace, fixes the problem entirely. Their new blueprint system walks you through building your own template. It asks you what pages you need, suggests fonts that actually work together, and it gives you matching color palettes that fit your aesthetic. So you're not just starting from a blank canvas hoping for the best. You're guided by 20 years of design experience that have been baked into that tool. And it then scales with you. Do you need native video hosting? Not embeds, actual native video with a proper player. It's all there in Squarespace, designed to work seamlessly together. And it means that whenever customers hit your site, it looks professional. And when they buy something from you, Squarespace Payments handles it all cleanly. So, you can build your site for free at squarespace.com/bellulargaming. And then, when you're ready to go live, use code BellularGaming and that'll get you 10% off your first purchase of a site or domain. It's 2004, the year of Half-Life 2, GTA San Andreas, Halo 2, and so many others, including World of Warcraft. We're logging in for the first time, and we're welcomed to Azeroth. We're introduced to the races, 4 for each faction. But no matter what we pick, we find our race can't claim its own borders. Scarlet's assault Tirisfal, Quillbore and Kultiran's march across Durotar, Stormwind is in full-blown revolution, and for some reason, Teldrassil's forests just got very dangerous. We secure the home front, but venturing out, it gets worse. Westfall is in freefall. Werewolves dominate Silverpine, the Barrens are primed for a Centaur invasion. It is a dangerous world. But these are only the first obstacles we find. We come to our faction's borders at level 20, these zones that are essentially the edge of the pocket of safety that we've carved out with our own hands. Outside that, we find a world often totally destroyed. Of course, many of us had spent endless hours destroying it in the previous 3 RTS titles. Lordaeron was engulfed in a zombie apocalypse, and from the Dark Irons to the Grim Totems, traitors were popping up left and right. The still-fresh Legion invasion left pockets of demons pretty much everywhere, and above it all, elemental lords, black dragons, and old gods were staking their claim to our chaotic world. But our efforts paid off. The wilds of Kalimdor and the wastelands of the Eastern Kingdoms were cut back. Breathing space, at last. But then came the next two threats, Illidan and Arthas. They were far away in Outland and Northrend, and once they were dealt with, it was back to our home territories, and it was time to expand the borders. Much of the Cataclysm story revolves around the legacy of two characters. Thrall, who had forged the new Horde and carved out a nation in Kalimdor, and then, of course, Varian Wrynn. At this point, he was actually living his dream as a mind-wiped enslaved gladiator named Logosh. A whole Warcraft comic adventure later, and he returned to Stormwind. And with that, the era of institutional alliance chaos was over. Varian was back, he was king, but of course, he was still a warrior, and he was going to do something about all these threats, and then do something about the Horde. But the next addition to the Alliance came from the most unexpected place. Outer space. The Draenei came hurtling through the Great Dark on a hijacked dimensional ship named the Exodar. They crash-landed on Azure Mist, and through the Night Elves, joined the Alliance. Head south, and the Alliance managed to secure Dustwallow Marsh and push a little into the Barrens. This was a new breed of Alliance aggression, with strongholds such as Fort Triumph dominating what should have been core Orc territory. But the real story in Kalimdor is of course that of the Horde. From Ashenvale to Tanaris, you see the red expand across the map. Goblins under Gazlowe join the Horde and move into Ashara, carving the land itself into a giant symbol of the Horde. The power to build all this coalesced under one man, Thrall, the war chief. But if you know your history, you'll know it wasn't Thrall who drove all of that red to war. It was Garrosh Hellscream. As the tides of war rose up in Kalimdor, Fort Triumph was destroyed, Dustwallow was secured, and Theramore would be bombed out of existence. And the Horde's rise was only beginning. What came next was a world-dominating military force. But of course, we can't count the Alliance out, because a lot went down in the Eastern Kingdoms. Across the ocean, Sylvanas, Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, pushed for Quel'Thalas to join the Horde. This was a little weird because the High Elves had spent the last decades killing trolls and killing orcs. Yet, after a Scourge apocalypse and the Alliance doing them dirty, the newly named Blood Elves had no home. And what was worse, their prince was half mad chasing demons across Outland. Without much choice, the Blood Elves joined the Horde. At first, think of it as a bond with the Forsaken that takes them into the Horde, the Blood Elves essentially feeling like a bit of a side faction of the Horde. But trust that one day, they would become the Horde's backbone. Sylvanas, though, didn't stop there. She secured Silverpine and pushed into Hillsbrad, her forces so effective that she leveled South Shore with plague bombs. Perhaps her greatest victory, though, was in Gilneas, where she forced a potential Alliance kingdom on her borders to fully evacuate. What she left was a feral wasteland, in a way useless as a resource, but in doing that, she ensured there would be no serious competition. Gan Greymane and his Worgen joined the Alliance, but that doesn't change the map much after the Forsaken expansion. There is, though, the Plaguelands. The Western Plaguelands were being systematically cleared of the Scourge, and the Forsaken even made it to Andorhal. But that is when Sylvanas met Varian and his immense appetite for war. The Alliance had arrived and were securing their own regions of the Plaguelands. But as strong as they were, the Forsaken had by now forged one of Azeroth's most brutally effective armies, and ultimately they won the day. With this final victory, the Alliance were left barely clinging on north of the Thandal Span. In the south, though, everything had changed. You see, Magni Bronzebeard had attempted an ancient earthen ritual and was turned into a diamond. That story only concludes in the World Soul Saga, but back in this era, it meant the dwarves were without a king. And this is where things got messy. The true heir to Ironforge was in fact Magni's grandson through his daughter Moira. You see, his name is Dagran Thaurissan II, and he is second in line after his dad to another throne, that being the Shadow Throne of Emperor Thaurissan of the Dark Iron Dwarves. Now, Moira attempted to assert her son's claim, but bungled the coup, forcing Varian to storm Ironforge. You may not have seen it in-game, but yeah, that actually happened. It was pretty cool. Yet, before Moira lost her head, Anduin convinced everyone to sit down and talk things through, leading to the reforging of the Council of the Three Hammers. And through that, as you can see, nearly all the lands of Khazmodan are now firmly within the Alliance. We got a coup, a siege, and a new government all inside one expansion. Suffice it to say, modern Azeroth hasn't had a move like that in the last 8 years. Stormwind, for its part, did push its borders out of the Swamp of Sorrows and deeper into the Blasted Lands, but Varian's eyes were set on international war. This is when he became High King of the Alliance, a direct counterpart to the Horde's war chief. Okay, let's zoom out. We now have two men, Garrosh and Varian, and two huge power blocks hoovering up the world. It was time to explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Pandaria came next, and it was the perfect narrative foil for the rising factional violence. It was a land haunted by the Sha, a remnant of the old gods that fed on negative emotions. The faction's logical next step, then, was to dump as much hatred and warfare into Pandaria as possible, accidentally empowering the Sha. It was a brutal conflict that split the continent apart. But we learned no lessons. Garrosh became the unhinged dictator of the Horde, and a Darkspear revolution unseated him. The Horde nearly died that day. Quite literally, the Alliance could have executed the Horde's leadership in Orgrimmar's throne room. But clearer heads prevailed, and Vol'jin became the new war chief. A dictator, a revolution, and a throne room standoff. The factions, by this stage, were generating Azeroth's largest stories, and they did so just by existing next to each other, with characters who were agents in the world, and with both sides coming to natural tensions because of expansion, because of resources, because of territorial claims. But of course, after Pandaria, it was off to alternate Draenor, where factional violence churned, and then we went back to Azeroth, and, with the events of the Broken Shore, got stuck into the third and final Legion invasion. It was during this invasion that Vol'jin took a poisoned blade to the chest, and, in his final breath, made Sylvanas the new war chief of the Horde. And with this, everything is now primed for all-out war between the factions. The map is dominated by red and blue. Two major holdouts, though, are Zandalar and Kul Tiras. But they were soon to bring their immense fleets to the fight as well. You see, the emergence of Azerite after Sargeras stabbed the world led to a massive problem for Azeroth. A vast new power source was there. It could absolutely be weaponized, and for those who weaponized it early, the Horde, the ultimate risk was finding themselves in a use-it-or-lose-it situation. This led to much politicking. In the background, allied races from across the setting had joined the factions. We had the city-state of Suramar now in personal union with Silvermoon, the Lightforged and their crazy light-based super weapons, the Mag'har escaping genocide from across dimensions. All of this strength building, until it felt like there was no choice but to pull the trigger on the war to end all wars. But here's the thing. Even back then, there wasn't a good reason for us to actually go to full-blown war, at least not an obvious one. Yes, there's the Azerite dimension, but I think we all know there is a jailer-shaped elephant in the room. I'll get to that on Sylvanas in a minute. But back then, I think we thought that all of this was just how stuff works. We called it cycles of violence. One death would lead to revenge being taken, that would lead to another death. One fort's destruction led to another town's burning. Time after time, all the way back to Warcraft 1. But we'd learned our lessons, right? We should have known better. Yet there we were once again, and unlike any previous war, this was truly global. By sheer extent, it was the greatest faction war ever fought. But in fighting it, were we being idiots? Or was there something else going on? Were we actually being manipulated? Because the new war chief Sylvanas seemed eager for war. Maybe she was brutally pragmatic. Maybe this was the only true way to save the Horde. Like Europe before the First World War, perhaps too much power had concentrated and the factions now felt forced to use it. Better to use it on the Alliance before they use it on us. But no, we were actually being manipulated, and this is the seed of the faction's death in the modern setting. But simply, Sylvanas was about to pull off the mother of all gaslighting exercises and totally destroy any credibility the factions had left. Just look at this map. These are the factions at the full extent of their power. They won't expand from here, they will just shrink and drop out of relevance. The reason the Fourth War became inevitable, and the reason the factions have dropped out of relevance since, is the same one. It is Sylvanas' deal with the Jailer. Across Warcraft's war, the Fourth War will stand with the Great as being one of Azeroth's bloodiest. It began with the War of Thorns, the burning of Teldrassil, and a planet-wide attack on Alliance forces. The Alliance struck back and emptied its regions of able-bodied men to fight on every front. The Undercity was attacked, plagued, and destroyed, forcing the war into the Arathi Highlands. But even at the height of the conflict, Blizzard were unable to bring it home. We did a handbrake turn into Nazjatar, and then discovered that Battle for Azeroth wasn't a faction war after all. No, it was an Old God expansion, and at the end of that journey lay N'Zoth. But the final faction showdown did take place, even though it wouldn't be the final boss of the expansion. And that is the Gates of Orgrimmar. Sylvanas' Horde loyalists against another band of revolutionaries out to take down their war chief. This time, wrapped up in the journey of Varrock Saurfang, an old orc who had seen a lot of war. He stepped forward at the Gates of Orgrimmar, challenged Sylvanas to Mak'gora, essentially ritualized combat, and, though it killed him, it showed everyone present just how pointless the war was. And that's because, in Sylvanas' own words, the Horde meant nothing. She then zipped off into the sky. A bit like Team Rocket. But it wasn't until we dealt with N'Zoth that we'd understand what any of that meant. Next thing, we found ourselves in the Shadowlands, and that's when we realized the whole war was designed to juice up the operations of a villain in the afterlife named the Jailer. And whilst we were discovering that, Anduin was captured, tortured, and made to do terrible things, such that when he returned to Azeroth, he ran from the throne of Stormwind, leaving the crown and the high kingship of the Alliance in a bit of a toss-up between Turalyon and Ghan. Because of that, the Alliance had little clear leadership, and their leadership didn't have much narrative impetus. Over on the Horde side, in the wake of Sylvanas, they had decided that war chiefs were in fact bad news, so they started a council. A council that has done very little since. But we're not sure if that's a consequence of them being ineffective, or a consequence of Blizzard refusing to use the Horde to actually tell stories. Let's revisit the map. Every border held. The stories were just left off. Everything just sat there for years. There were occasional stories, yes, like the Alliance reclaiming Gilneas, or the very beginnings of unplaguing the Undercity. Most recently, there was some storytelling with the factions. Suramar and the Kaldori were shoehorned into their own sub-faction with the Blood Elves, leaving us to wonder where the hell the original factions of World of Warcraft are. And what's odd, what stands out, is Xal'atath's attack. With that, the threat she represented, and still represents, is existential in scale, and she did succeed. She's likely in the World Core, ready to do whatever's next in her plan. Yet, all this red and blue in the maps, all these years of built-up power and politics, led to nothing. The factions did not respond. In fact, the factional response was so silent, people wondered if they still existed. Ultimately, this is a map that we've made because we want to remind Blizzard in a clear way that can't be ignored that this is how Azeroth exists in our minds. I don't think it's how Azeroth exists in Blizzard's minds. And that's a problem. One day, they're going to need to deal with this. And that's what brings me to the end of our map exploration. If you want a deep dive on how Blizzard personally murdered the Horde out of the setting, which I think is appropriate after this video, well, I have good news. You can check out this video next.